Christmas dinner, my husband leaned in, breath warm with cinnamon, and whispered, "You're here out of sympathy, don't get used to it," and the room kept clinking like nothing had cracked but me. The chandelier hummed above the table, casting soft halos on polished silver, while pine and roasting butter drifted through the heat like rehearsed hospitality. Someone laughed at the far end, a bright, brittle sound, and the carols in the next room hiccuped over a scratched chorus. I watched the gravy make a brown river through my mashed potatoes and felt my throat tighten around an answer I would not give. Wax from the taper candles had pooled into little white lakes, and their light touched the edge of my plate like it was choosing sides. His cuff brushed my knuckles and then withdrew, neat as a signature, and a place card with my name tilted toward the empty space between us. Across the table, his mother adjusted her brooch and didn't quite meet my eyes, the politest kind of omission. The cranberry sauce held its shape like something unwilling to soften, and I felt the same, firming quietly from the inside out. I could hear the furnace kick on, a low animal breathing in the vents, steadying me more than any apology could. Silverware chimed, a toast rose and fell without my name, and in that omission the room finally told the truth. I folded my napkin across my lap, not to hide my shaking, but to give it somewhere gentle to rest. The snow outside pressed its face to the window, and the glass cooled the heat beneath my skin. I counted my breaths, 1 for the girl I used to be, 2 for the woman I'd become, 3 for the answer I would not give aloud. When I lifted my glass, my hand didn't tremble, it remembered that silence can be chosen, not imposed. I smiled without showing teeth, set down my fork, and knew exactly what I would and wouldn't do next. The table stretched longer than it needed to, a satin runner of red berries and gold thread guiding eyes past place cards toward the head where my husband's parents presided like ushers of an old ritual, and I was stationed near the draft, a polite distance disguised as hospitality. Crystal stemware winked under the chandelier's soft shimmer, each glass catching carol light from the den, while the scent of clove-studded ham and sugared yams drifted in warm waves that never quite settled at my end of the linen. His mother, immaculate in winter pearls, adjusted the centerpiece so it blocked my line to her, a floral snowbank positioned with care, and her smile skimmed me the way a stone skims water, touching without sinking. The cousins compared flights and bonuses, an uncle recited markets like a second creed, laughter flared, then thinned, as if the room itself knew where warmth was meant to gather and where it could afford to cool. My place card leaned against the bread plate as though resting from effort, my name inked correctly yet positioned like a footnote, and I traced the bevel of the china to steady the small tilt I felt inside. My husband's elbow angled toward conversation, away from me, forming a neat hinge in the air, a domestic geometry that solved for every variable but care. When his father tapped a spoon to call for grace, the silver chimed clear, and everyone bowed just enough to be seen bowing, the piety of posture more precise than the prayer. I poured water, not wine, listened for my name in the toast, and found only family pronounced like a door that swings one way, soft applause sealing the draft that fluttered my napkin. A nephew asked who'd carved the turkey, someone answered we, and the word moved past me like a train I wasn't meant to board, brisk, efficient, on time. The chandelier hummed, the furnace breathed, and the garland's tiny bulbs blinked their agreement with the seating chart, each light a yes that knew where not to look. I smiled the way steam smiles from a cup, visible, harmless, gone, and felt the room's verdict settle without a gavel, the performance of inclusion hitting its mark. So I adjusted my chair a half-inch, not to join them but to hear myself, and in that small shift the evening disclosed its lines, leaving me to decide when to deliver mine. We didn't marry into a family so much as into a system, and my place in it was quietly pre-assigned before I learned the rules. My husband fit the center of that system without friction, fluent in its in-jokes and handshakes, while I learned to orbit without drifting too close. His mother curated tone like a hostess curates light, just bright enough for approval to gleam, dim enough for disapproval to pass as oversight. His father measured value in tasks completed and faces saved, and I became the reliable understudy, rehearsed for emergencies, never offered the lead. The siblings managed lanes, one charming, one competent, one permanently forgiven, and I learned where to stand so my usefulness didn't cast a shadow. Small slights did the heavy lifting, a photo where my shoulder made the cut but my smile did not, a group text where details arrived after decisions. Gratitude came as weather reports, pleasant when I solved something, overcast when I asked for clarity, a storm watch if I said not this time. I became the keeper of calendars, the finder of sweaters, the thank you note ghostwriter, invisible enough to be missed only when I stopped moving. At home, love arrived on schedule but empathy arrived late, and I learned to translate silence into "you're fine" until the translation failed me. We had tenderness, yes, but it traveled best on his terms, and on mine it caught a draft and lost its way to the table. I told myself this was culture, not character, tradition, not verdict, and made peace with being helpful where I could not be claimed. But patterns are promises wearing habits, and by December they had promised me a role I never auditioned for and could no longer carry. Even the house knew it, his mother's perfume outlasting the hugs, his father's watch tapping minutes into manners, my name set delicately at the edge. I kept my smile polished and my voice low, listening for any sign the script might change on its own, and heard only the cue to enter. By the time the candles guttered and the toast dissolved into forks, I understood who wrote the lines, and that I could stop reciting them. The first year, my place card went missing, and they called it a mix-up while my chair waited by the coat rack like an afterthought in a house that remembered everyone else by name. In photos, my shoulder made the frame but my face didn't, cropped by a thumb that apologized to no one, the shutter clicking through smiles that closed before they reached me. Errands loved me more than people did, ice runs, extra napkins, the gravy boat, small pilgrimages that kept me moving and therefore easy to overlook. Someone would ask who brought the pie, and we answered for them, a tidy word that erased the hour I'd spent crimping crusts in a quiet kitchen. I learned applause had rules, loud for big gestures anyone could see, soft for the steady hands that set the table and made the room gentle. Jokes came wrapped in ribbon, lighten up, we're teasing, don't be so sensitive, and the bow slipped tight the moment I tried to untie it. If I sat, a list appeared, if I stood, a camera, if I spoke, the conversation moved on without breaking stride. Gratitude arrived like weather, pleasant when I solved a problem, brisk when I needed warmth, gone entirely if I asked for it by name. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, a private mercy that dissolved as soon as the plates cleared and the next tradition took the stage. I told myself this was just their rhythm, that every family keeps time differently, and I could learn the steps if I listened harder. But the steps never changed, only my feet grew tired of dancing around apologies that never learned my address. Year after year, I tucked the sting beneath fresh linen, smoothing what no one else could feel with the palm of a practiced host. By last Christmas, even the garland knew the script, its lights blinking in time with the laugh lines that skipped my name. And somewhere between the toast I wasn't in and the blessing I whispered for myself, I realized traditions can be curtains too, and I had finally found the edge to pull. I kept a ledger no one saw, menus, RSVPs, allergies, airport pickups, oven timings, and who needed decaf after 7, while my name stayed off the marquee and my hand stayed on the work. I ordered gifts weeks early, wrapped them in paper that matched the garland, and printed return labels in case sizes ran small, a contingency plan disguised as cheer. When a cousin forgot the rolls, I slid a backup pan from the second shelf. When the centerpiece shed pine needles, I brushed them away before they could be blamed on the wrong person. I tracked expenses like a bookkeeper of goodwill, last-minute Ubers for tipsy uncles, a replacement ornament when the heirloom shattered, extra folding chairs that no one remembered bringing in. I wrote thank you notes in his voice because his gratitude was genuine, but his pen was late, and I preferred the bridge stay intact rather than wait for the right engineer to arrive. I kept peace with the gentle frictions, redirected a sharp comment into a gentler lane, changed the playlist before the story that always turns mean, poured water where wine would have poured fuel. When tempers rose, I lowered the oven, set out more gravy, and let the room think it had calmed itself, the way a child believes the nightlight is the sun. I saved receipts because it helped me sleep, not for reimbursement but as proof to myself that the labor had happened and that I hadn't imagined the lift. Even the small mercies had a cost, leaving my plate to rescue a congealing sauce, laughing on cue after the punchline, offering my scarf to a guest who'd forgotten theirs. I learned to make solutions arrive before anyone named the problem, a magician whose only trick was foresight and whose applause was the absence of complaint. Quietly, the arithmetic stopped working, the numbers didn't match the warmth, and the warmth didn't reach where I stood, and no spreadsheet fixes that. So I folded another napkin, smoothed another edge, and told myself the truth under my breath. Tonight I would keep a different kind of receipt, and it wouldn't be for the dishes. The room read me as composed, but inside I felt the temperature drop 2 degrees, a hush settling under my ribs that no one else seemed to notice. My jaw unclenched one notch at a time, the way you ease a lid to keep the pot from boiling, and the small mercy of control steadied my hands on the linen. I could hear my own pulse thread through the holiday music like a second metronome, quiet but insistent, reminding me that my body keeps time even when the room forgets me. The scent of cloves rode the heat from the kitchen, sweet on the surface, sharp beneath, and I recognized the way a pleasant thing can sting if held too close. I placed my napkin carefully, a small white flag that meant nothing of surrender and everything of choosing when to speak. My smile behaved, but the muscles along my spine loosened like a curtain unhooking, and in that slow release I found a pocket of air big enough to breathe like myself. The chandelier hummed, the furnace answered, and in their steady exchange I heard a language older than approval, one that did not require me to translate my worth. I took a sip of water and let it sit cool on my tongue, a brief rehearsal for saying less and meaning more. Under the table, my heel found the floor's seam, a tiny ridge I pressed with my shoe until calm rose through the bones. Names passed over me like sleet on a windshield, and for once I didn't chase clarity with explanations, I simply watched what slid and what stuck. A thought arrived without fanfare, boundaries aren't walls, they're weather fronts, and the pressure had already begun to change. I straightened my fork to the edge of the plate, a quiet alignment that made room for one inside me. Someone laughed, someone poured, and I let the sounds move around me the way a river moves around a rock that has finally decided not to erode. Peace didn't feel like victory, just the absence of pleading, and in that absence I recognized a voice I trusted as my own. I looked at the candles and saw how evenly they burned when no one breathed too close, and I kept my breath steady. By the time the toast rose again, my answer had settled where no hand could reach it, waiting for the moment it would be needed, and only then. The chair they saved for me skimmed the edge of the tablecloth, close enough to pass for included, far enough that the centerpiece's winter roses turned my face into a blur behind their thorns. A cousin leaned toward another and murmured, "Pity invite like a garnish on the turkey," the word sliding across the gravy boat before settling in front of my plate. When the camera came out, his mother said, "Let's do family first," arranging bodies with the ease of muscle memory, and I learned again how a single word can be a velvet rope. Someone asked where I should stand, and an aunt solved it by pressing the shutter before the question finished, laughter snipping the thread of my name midair. The toast rose, gratitude for love, health, togetherness, and landed neatly on every face but mine, the syllables hopping the empty space as if it were a spill to be avoided. A nephew passed the rolls clockwise and skipped my hand without malice, only momentum, and the basket smiled past like a train that didn't stop at small stations. My husband refilled glasses with the bright competence of a maitre d', and when he reached mine he hesitated a beat too long, as if generosity were rationed and I had already had my turn. His father clapped him on the shoulder, "Couldn't have done it without you, son," and the table agreed, the chorus tidy as napkins folded into boats. A sister-in-law slid her chair an inch closer to the center and I felt the draft claim the space she left behind, cold air reading my posture for permission. When a dish went empty, someone said, "We'll make do," and I heard the echo answer, "You will, because I always do." The chandelier hummed like a secret, and the candle nearest me guttered as if to nod at what the room preferred not to see. I lifted my water and watched the light fracture in the glass, each shard finding a different face and none returning to me. My smile held, useful, quiet, exact, while the cranberry's perfect ridges softened under the heat, a neat geometry giving way without announcement. Then his mother tilted the flowers another inch, and the petals completed their curtain, and I understood how easily absence can be staged. I set my fork down so gently it made no sound at all, and for the first time all evening, the silence belonged to me. I felt the answer gather at the back of my throat like weather, and I knew the next thing I did would change the rest of the night. Tradition asked me to keep smiling, refill a glass, pass a dish, and trust that the ritual would soften the edges, but the edges had learned to hide inside the ritual itself. I told myself the season was bigger than a whisper, that kindness could hold the weight of one cruel sentence the way a good table holds too many plates. Yet every carol felt a note off, as if the harmony required me to go quiet first, and I could no longer pretend that silence was the same thing as peace. The tree sparkled as if to vouch for us, but the ornaments reflected the room in fragments, and in each shard I saw the same scene, included, then erased. I weighed courtesy against dignity, the way you weigh a crystal bowl in your hands and realize it's already cracked, just waiting for the right light to show it. Part of me wanted to wait it out, to let dessert sweeten what dinner had soured, to let the night end tidy so morning could rewrite it. Another part stood very still inside my chair and listened to the small insistent truth that had stopped knocking and started turning the handle. I thought about all the years I'd kept tempers low by lowering myself, the calories of comfort I'd baked into rooms that forgot who warmed the oven. If I spoke now, would I become the story that ruined Christmas, or the woman who finally stepped out of a role everyone else enjoyed watching me play? If I stayed quiet, I knew the credits would roll without my name again, and the sequel would already be on the calendar. The fork in front of me held my reflection, small and curved, and I recognized how much of me had been shaped to fit the setting. Someone joked about second helpings, and laughter rose like steam, but I felt the pot go dry, a scorched sweetness clinging to whatever I used to swallow. I folded my napkin once, twice, a careful crease I could not unfold, and my hands steadied like they do before the most delicate work. Tradition had become a stage, and I stood in the wings, deciding whether to cue the same scene or pull the curtain with both hands. When my husband reached for the wine and didn't look at me, the decision stepped forward, quiet as snow, and waited for me to nod. I took stock the way I balance a checkbook, line by line, calm and honest. Airport runs in bad weather, last-minute table leaves, batteries for the candles nobody remembered needed batteries. I tracked the dishes I always bring and the backups I always stash, the way I tape an extra set of name tags in my purse so no one has to admit they forgot mine again. I counted the RSVP nudges sent from my phone, the "no worries, I've got it" texts, the quiet refunds when someone miscalculated and the server was already waiting with the bill. There were the thank you notes written in other people's voices, the apologies drafted when tempers cooled, the rides home given to guests who arrived with jokes and left with silence. I added the grocery lists I completed from memory, the replacement ornaments I ordered overnight, and the extra folding chairs that appear as if by goodwill alone. I tallied the birthdays I remembered for a family that remembered to be surprised, and the pies I baked that we placed on the table. I listed the times I smoothed a comment into something kinder, changed the song before the story that turns mean, refilled water when wine only sharpened edges. I noted the photos I took so everyone could be in the picture that I wouldn't be asked to hold, and the way my name slid off the caption like condensation. I itemized the Ubers I covered and the tips I padded, because the math of grace always seemed to come up short when it touched my side of the ledger. I included the group chat reminders, the seating swaps to avert a fight, the stitches of small kindness that kept the fabric from tearing in public. I even wrote down the silences, how often I swallowed the sentence that would have made the room honest for 30 seconds and difficult for the rest of the night. And next to every line I penciled a simple note, can end quietly, no announcement required. No more backup rolls in the trunk, no more unsigned thank yous, no more "I'll just take care of it" when I was never in the photograph to begin with. The list didn't accuse, it clarified, like wiping steam from a mirror and finding my own face looking back, steady and unsurprised. By the last item, I realized all this leaving could be done as I've done everything else here, neatly, gently, and without anyone noticing until the warmth they borrowed stops arriving on time. I carried my plate to the kitchen the way one carries a sleeping child, steady, careful, unwilling to wake anything that might start crying again inside the house or inside me. The faucet hissed to life and the water ran warm over porcelain, a thin veil of steam rising until the window fogged and the world on the other side softened into shapes without names. I slipped the sponge along the rim in small circles, grease loosening with a quiet surrender that felt almost like permission. The scent of cloves drifted in from the dining room, sweeter at a distance, and the carols muffled themselves in the hallway like company that knows when to lower its voice. I rinsed, tilted, watched the last beads of water gather and fall, and realized I was waiting for something that did not require anyone else to arrive. On the counter lay a clean dish towel folded into thirds, the kind of order I make so holidays don't come apart, and I thought how often I've been the towel and not the hand. My wedding band clicked once against the plate, a small bright sound that marked the moment the thought turned from weather to forecast. No speeches, no tremor, just the quiet geometry of aligning a plate with the shelf where it has always belonged and deciding it will not go back there for me tonight. I dried my hands slowly, each finger finding its own way out of the cloth, the way a sentence finds its way out of the mouth when it is finally true. From the doorway, the room continued without me, silver chimed, a laugh rose, someone asked for salt, and none of it needed my translation to survive. My reflection in the dark window looked like a woman standing in snow that had not yet fallen, already listening for the hush that comes after the first flake lands. I set the towel down, squared it to the edge of the counter, and felt my shoulders lower as if a string had been cut by a careful hand. There was no anger in the decision, only the rightness of shoes that finally fit, and the patience of a door that closes without slamming. I turned toward the hall, the warmth of the vent at my ankles, the music softer now, and knew exactly which words I would carry back to the table, and which I would leave here to dry. I began with small edits no one would notice, the kind that look like tidying but are really exits with the lights left on, returning the spare keys I kept just in case, deleting the shared grocery list, and saving my own in a folder named Winter Quiet. In the hall, I lifted the extra coats I always stash for forgetful guests and hung them neatly back where they belonged in my house, a gesture that felt like waking my sleeves from someone else's sleep. I opened my phone and archived the group chat threads that start with quick favor and end with me carrying the rest, leaving a clean screen where urgency used to live. On a note card, I copied the numbers I'd kept in my head, rides covered, bills rounded up, tips padded, then photographed it, proof for a future that wouldn't require me to re-argue the past. Receipts that used to fold quietly into my wallet went flat in a single envelope, labeled by month, the paper calm as snowfall once the wind has passed. I removed my card from the delivery accounts, watched the autofills disappear, and felt the relief of a drawer that closes without catching. The backup rolls in my trunk came inside, the spare name tag slipped into a junk drawer, the emergency candles finally belonged to power outages, not polite ones. I drafted a one-sentence boundary on a blank note in my phone, no more unplanned errands or expenses, ask first, accept no, simple enough to memorize, sturdy enough to stand. In the guest room, I folded the lending blankets and set them on the shelf, a soft inventory of how often comfort leaves and how rarely it returns with a thank you. I set an early alarm for morning, not for cleanup but for a walk, because plans made for myself are the quietest kind of revolution. Back at the doorway, the dinner hum rose and fell, and I realized the machine runs without my oiling it, though it may squeak in places they never thought to listen. I slipped my phone into my pocket, felt the weight of a life I could actually carry, and knew this was how leaving begins, orderly, humble, already underway. The last thing I did was press my palm to the cool window and watch my breath bloom and fade, a trial run for words that would not need repeating when the time came. In the fogged oval, my face steadied, and the plan felt less like escape and more like returning to a room that had been waiting with the door cracked. I straightened the towel on the counter, a line true to the edge, and heard the quiet answer back, ready when you are. I drafted the boundary the way one drafts a will, clear, brief, and meant to be read once. Do not speak to me with contempt. If it happens, I will leave, without debate or delay. I kept the language small enough to fit in a breath, because the larger the speech, the more room there is for someone else to move in and rearrange it. It named behavior, not character, and paired it with a consequence I could carry without needing an audience or permission. I added a second line for the season itself. I do not attend events where I am present as pity, respect or absence, those are the choices. A third for money, the quiet river under every holiday. I will not fund what erases me, any request comes first, with room for no. No lectures, no inventories, no door marked history, only present tense facts that protect the person I have to live with when the guests go home. I rehearsed it once in the pantry, voice low, posture easy, like telling the time to someone who asked for it. The delivery would be private, a hallway where the garland thins, eyes level, hands still, so dignity could hear itself without the scrape of chairs. If he deflected a joke, shrug, whether, I would repeat it once, softer, as if setting down a heavy bowl exactly where it belongs. If he asked why now, I would say because I need to be well in my own home, and this is how I begin. There would be no vote, no cross-examination, no pile of exhibits. Boundaries do not ask to be liked, only honored. I tucked the words into my palm the way one tucks a matchbook into a pocket, small, sufficient, able to make light. The candles breathed evenly, the floor held steady, and I felt the ground agree with the terms I had set. When I turned toward the doorway, the garland brushed my sleeve and didn't catch, a sign that the path was clear if I chose to take it. I stepped into the spill of hallway light and waited for him to notice the quiet I was carrying. When he looked up, I knew I would not raise my voice to be heard. I would simply say what was true and let it stand. He found me in the hallway by the garland, his smile neat as a napkin fold, and said, "Don't make it a thing, it's Christmas," as if the day itself were a referee with a whistle nobody could hear. I told him, quietly, what I would and would not accept, the way you tell someone the time when they ask. His eyes flicked to the dining room, looking for an easier conversation to join. "Sensitive," he said, the word dressed like concern, and I watched it try to hang itself on my shoulders the way a coat does when it's not your size. A cousin brushed past with a tray and winked, "All good?" The kind of question that only wants one answer, and I handed back the tray with a yes that meant no more work from me. My phone lit in my pocket, a message from his sister, "Let's not ruin the night over a misunderstanding," and I could feel the familiar script unrolling, long enough to wrap the evening twice. Another ping, "We love having you here," which is not the same as "we love you," and the difference glinted like glass under candlelight. From the dining room came a cheer about pie, a chorus for the next course, and for a second I stood in the old current, the one that carries you back to the table with a plate and a practiced grin. He tried a joke to reset the room, but it skidded on the tile between us and never found traction. "Talk later," he offered, which has always meant never or not until you're quiet again, and the garland brushed my sleeve like a reminder of all the years I waited for later. I nodded once, not in agreement but in acknowledgement that the first wave had landed, and I felt the next one gathering just beyond the doorway, taller than the last. I kept my answer small, the kind that fits in a breath, because explanations are where I usually lose myself. "I'm stepping out for a minute," I said, neither apology nor dare, and the words held still like a level bubble. In the mudroom I slipped on my coat and felt the quiet weight of the fabric settle my shoulders where people had tried to set their hands. The night air met me with that clean, pine-bitten cold that makes the lungs honest, and I counted to 4 in and 6 out until my pulse stopped pleading. My phone vibrated again, but I let it speak to my pocket instead of my attention, the first small mercy I gave myself all evening. When I went back, I moved like a lighthouse, steady beam, slow arc, no need to shout to be seen. I answered checking questions with simple truths, "I'm fine, I'm taking a break, I'll be back for coffee," and I let the silence carry the rest of the meaning. If someone joked about thin skin, I smiled like a closed book and turned the page with my eyes, a boundary so plain it didn't require an index. When my husband brushed my elbow as if to tether me, I eased an inch away, not a scene, just a corrected distance. I kept my hands busy with the small rituals that belong to me, rinsing a cup, straightening a chair, breathing through the nose and out through the mouth. I let questions pass that were really arguments in costumes, the way you let a parade go by without stepping into the street. When the old script arrived, "Can we talk later?" I answered, "We can talk kindly now or not at all tonight," and left the choice on the table like a clean fork. The room tested my quiet twice more, then moved on to pie, and the relief in my spine felt like a zipper coming down after a long day. I filled my own plate for once and tasted the food I had been cooking toward for years, simple, warm, not borrowed. From the far end of the table, a younger voice said my name without needing a favor, and the sound found me like a handrail on the stairs. I looked up and met a pair of steady eyes across the candles, and something in the room finally shifted its weight. I kept my voice low and my answers smaller than a sip of water, because the longer I talk in this house, the easier it is for someone else to name what I mean for me. When a cousin asked if I was over it, I said, "I'm fine for now," and let the words sit like a paperweight on the table, heavy enough to keep the page from turning where I didn't want it to go. If a joke came toward me with its hands out, I stepped a half-inch to the side and gave it nothing to hold, neither laugh nor lecture, only air. When his mother offered a smile that asked me to smooth things over, I returned one that said I was already smooth, and I wasn't taking on any new wrinkles tonight. I set a time in my head, 20 minutes, then reassess, the way you do in a waiting room when you know the doctor can't fix what rest will. My fork and knife aligned neatly to the plate's rim, a small geometry I could control while the room tried to redraw my outline. I took water, not wine, and let the coolness tell my pulse the truth. Nothing here needs saving by me. When my husband floated "we'll talk later," I answered, "We can talk kindly or wait," and left the words like a spare key on the ledge, available, not begged for. Aunties tested the old doorways, "You know he didn't mean it, don't be so sensitive," and I let their sentences pass through me like wind through a screen, felt, not trapped. My phone buzzed, I silenced it without looking, because I've learned emergencies find you even when your ringer is off, and everything else can wait. I breathed in clove and candle wax and the faint electric hum of the chandelier, a choir of small sounds reminding me that steadiness has its own music. Every time my throat reached for a longer explanation, I swallowed once and chose a shorter truth, the kind that doesn't bruise when it lands. I let the table's laughter roll past like surf, and kept my feet where the water turns gentle, not because I'm afraid to swim, but because tonight I'm not lifeguarding anyone. The cranberry's edges had softened under the heat, and I could feel my own edges hold, round but intact, not dissolving to make other people's mouths sweet. When the camera lifted again and someone said family, I didn't move to prove my place, I stayed seated and let the word do its own accounting. Across the candles, a younger pair of eyes met mine without flinching, and in that quiet recognition the room's balance shifted by a breath, as if it knew something was about to give. The younger cousin didn't look away, just tipped his chin toward the empty chair near the fireplace, and I understood the invitation for what it was, space offered, not begged for. I lifted my plate and moved without explanation, a quiet migration from draft to warmth, from edge to center of myself, the scrape of chair legs the only announcement I needed. The fire took me in with its even breath, and my shoulders unhooked another notch as if heat could translate my name correctly at last. Someone called for coffee, and I didn't rise, felt the old rope tug and didn't stand, and the not standing echoed louder than any apology I could have given. When a tray was pressed in my direction, I smiled and let it pass, the way you let a train go by when you're no longer headed that way. My husband glanced over, confusion soft around the edges, and I met his eyes without leaving my chair, a conversation measured in inches, not arguments. The cousin sat on the hearth and asked if the chair was free. I said yes, and for once the word didn't mean here, take what I need. I set my phone to do not disturb and felt the room's demands mute to a hum, the difference between a swarm and a single bee at the window. When the plates clattered toward cleanup, I folded my napkin and kept it on my lap, a small refusal that harmed no one and saved me. I checked the time I'd promised myself and stood only to get my coat, not for service but for leaving on my own terms. At the doorway I thanked the room the way a traveler thanks a station, polite, brief, aware that the destination isn't here. My husband started to speak. I touched his sleeve and said, home for me tonight, 6 words set down like a key exactly where it belongs. The night air met me with clean cold, and the first breath tasted like something I had been saving without knowing it. Snow hadn't started yet, but the sky held the color it takes on before weather changes, and I walked toward my car as if I'd been expected. The engine turned and settled, steady as a heartbeat that finally remembers its own rhythm. In the rear view, the house shrank to a string of lights, and none of them blinked for me to turn back. I parked in the quiet and let the engine's ticking fade until the house and I could hear each other breathe, the porch light painting a small gold square on the winter dark. Inside, I set my keys in the dish without clatter, shrugged off my coat, and stood in the stillness I'd been building toward all night, as if the room had been saving my place. The phone rang, then again, and I let it ring to the end each time, the sound passing through the walls like weather I didn't need to stand in anymore. When his name lit the screen a third time, I answered and said my boundary as clearly as a street name: do not speak to me with contempt. If it happens, I leave. Tonight I have left. He started with the old tools, joke, shrug in his voice, a promise to talk later, and I set my words down again, the way you set a glass where it cannot tip. I'm not debating this. Silence pooled, the kind that used to pull me back into explaining, and I let it be the whole of what it was, unfilled, undecorated, enough. I'll come get you, he said, already halfway to making this easier for himself, and I answered, kindly tomorrow, not tonight. If you go, it'll look bad, he tried, and I felt the last thread loosen, because looking good has cost me enough. I added the money line softly, the river named at last. I won't fund what erases me, ask first, allow for no. He exhaled, the sound of someone learning the shape of a word they don't like and can't change, and I kept my breath steady so mine wouldn't change either. We ended the call without slamming it shut, 2 clicks and a quiet, and the room held. I poured water, not wine, and the glass felt right in my hand, weight and balance finally agreeing with me. On the counter, I wrote a single line on a note card and slipped it into my wallet: respect or absence. Outside, the sky gathered itself for snow, and I watched the street lamp wait with me for the first flake. In the hush before weather changes, a key truth arrived and did not ask to be repeated: this is not a threat, it is a new fact. When the first snow finally touched the glass, it melted cleanly and left no mark, and I knew what I'd do if tomorrow tested the line I'd drawn tonight. Morning arrived like a careful blessing, winter light finding the kitchen tile and making a small square of warmth I could stand inside without asking permission. The kettle sang its single pure note, and steam curled from the mug in soft ribbons, the kind that lace the air without hurrying anyone. The old clock in the hallway ticked the way good hearts do, steady, unshowy, content to keep time rather than keep score. I opened the blinds to frost veining the window, a delicate map of everywhere I didn't have to go. The house breathed in its winter way, radiators clicking, floorboards settling, the gentle hum of a room that had finally heard me. I set a single plate on the table and placed my mug beside it, surprised by how enough a setting for one can be when it belongs to the right person. I buttered toast and watched the melt travel to the edges, a quiet geography of warmth doing exactly what warmth should. On a clean sheet of paper, I wrote a list that did not outrun my day: walk at 9, call the dentist, change the sheets, water the fern, read 3 chapters, rest. There were no errands for other people, no hurry disguised as kindness, no quick favor that grows heavy by noon. I checked my phone and turned off the banners, leaving only the numbers I might want to see and none of the noise. In the quiet, I noticed small things I used to miss: the way sunlight finds the spoon bowl first, the faint citrus at the peel's edge, the clean weight of my own name in the room. I rinsed the cup, set it to dry, and did not race the drip. Everything here could take the time it needed. My coat waited on the chair like a simple promise kept, not a rescue mission in disguise. I tied my scarf and looked once more at the list, pleased that every line required only one set of hands. Before stepping out, I slid a note into the bowl by the door, "You may choose calm," and felt the truth of it answer back. When the cold met my face, it felt like a clean page, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't reach for an eraser. I used to think goodness meant saying yes until my voice was hoarse, but goodness without self-respect is just a polite way to go missing in plain sight. Kindness counts when it includes the person offering it, and I finally learned that leaving a table where I'm insulted is not cruelty, it's truthful care for everyone present. Love that requires me to be useful first is a contract, not a covenant, and contracts can be declined when the terms erase a name. I do not need a chorus to confirm my worth. A single steady breath in a quiet room tells me more than a standing ovation delivered after someone else's lines. Apologies are lovely when they arrive, but healing doesn't have to wait for them, and tonight mine didn't. Boundaries are not punishments, they are directions that let love find the correct door, and if love won't knock there, it's not lost, it's revealed. There is a difference between peacekeeping and peace, and I'm done mistaking silence for safety when it only shields the loudest person in the room. I can be grateful for the holidays I tried my best and still choose a new way to spend the next one, because tradition is a tool, not a leash. The measure of a home is whether a person can be well inside it, and tonight I chose wellness over witnesses. I owe no one a long defense of my dignity. I showed it what it asked for: steadiness, clarity, and the door when contempt walked in. Forgiveness may come later, or it may not, but either way I will not set myself on fire to warm a room that refuses to close its windows. What I carried out into the winter dark was small enough to hold in one hand, respect or absence, and I am finally fluent in both. If love wishes to stay, it will learn my language, and if it leaves, I will not translate myself into a stranger to make it comfortable. I am not the sum of errands completed or jokes endured. I am the person who decides which tables deserve my chair and which do not. And this is the lesson I will not unlearn. Choosing myself is not a betrayal of anyone else, it is the beginning of honest love for everyone involved. If any part of this story felt familiar, consider sharing the moment when a quiet no first arrived and what changed after it did, even if the change was small and private. What tradition has been gently rewritten to make room for dignity, and what single sentence helped it happen, respect or absence, or another phrase that steadied the hand. If there is a chair at a table that never quite made space, describe what it would mean to stand up without anger and claim a kinder seat elsewhere. For those who've walked this path before, leave a note for someone standing in the hallway right now, wondering if calm is allowed. Stories like these travel further when a simple light tells the room they matter, and a share places them in front of someone who needed the words today. Subscribing keeps this circle intact for the next evening when steady voices are needed more than loud ones. In the comments, offer the boundary that finally held, the script that was quietly retired, or the new ritual that made the season gentle again. If speaking aloud feels heavy, a single line will do. Here is what respect looks like in my house. Consider this a standing invitation to choose calm without apology and to build holidays that do not require anyone to disappear to be welcome. For those still deciding, hold the question close: what does a kind yes mean tonight, and what does a clear no protect? If compassion is needed first, take it here. If courage is needed next, borrow a little and return it when the hands are steady. This space honors quiet victories, slow mornings, and the kind of love that knocks at the right door and waits to be invited in. add a voice below, invite a friend who's listening for theirs, and stay for the next story that begins where this one leaves off.